My name is Stephen Lerman, Stephen Lerman. I was born in Poland. The city's name was Zambrów. It's not far from Białystok, and a little bit further was Warsaw, the main highway from Warsaw to Białystok. Was born in 1927. As a kid...
What was the name of the town?
The name of the town was Zambrów.
Okay.
And I was the youngest of 6. And what I remember is my father was in the First World War, and 3 of the first kids were girls, and they were born before my father went into the First World War, and then he was a prisoner of war in France for a few years. I don't know the exact time or dates. After he came back, 3 more kids were born, a girl and 2 boys, and I was the youngest of 6. And my father's trade was a turner, which is everything made into rounded wood, like the hub for wheels or legs for tables, and a little bit of carpentry work. And we had no electricity, and in fact I don't remember we had even a wooden floor. It was dirt floor in the early years. In the later 30s, I think my father put down a wooden floor. At later on in the years, I remember the 3 older girls, my sisters, some of them were married, and some of them moved out, and we were left with the 3 kids were born after the First World War. So,
did you have a religious upbringing? Oh, keep talking.
Okay. So,
yeah, keep talking.
As far as I know, my father was very religious before going into the service, and after he came back, after a few years as a prisoner of war, he came back and he was angry because some of the religious guys and the rabbis, they didn't bother to help out some of the prisoners. So when he came back, he really did not want to go for services or stick to the religion due to the way he was treated during the First World War. But otherwise, usually the farmers, twice a week, they used to bring goods to the marketplace to sell, because it was a nice size marketplace, a lot of everything by way. In those days, whatever I can remember until 39, there were no cars on the street. I don't remember anybody owning any kind of vehicles. It was mostly farmers with a horse and wagon, and people used to buy from the farmers whatever they sold and then take it to the biggest cities like Warsaw to sell like any other business person. That's how they made their living. And
excuse me, during this period, did you experience any anti-Semitism during
even before,
toward the late 30s?
Before the Second World War, was plenty problems. They used to walk around with signs for the Gentile not to buy from Jews. And some of the kids that went to high school, the non-Jews used to throw stones at them. And there was a lot of fights among kids, a kind of everything against the Jews. So when the war started in 1939, Poland was divided. Part of it was occupied by the Germans and part of the Russians. The part that I lived in was occupied by the Russians, and the border between the Russians and the Germans was about 30 kilometers from our hometown. During the occupation by the Russians, everything to buy, you had to stay in line. Was a shortage of everything. And this lasted from 39 to 41. During the Russian occupation, as I remember, there were no killings of the population, whether Jews or Gentile. Maybe it was incidents here and there, but there was no mass murder. And a lot of Russia took some younger people for the military. So a lot of young people, when the Second World War started in 41, were in the Russian army. So a lot of them survived, a lot of them got killed, and a lot of them, they took to Siberia to work or other places. So those people were luckier than got stuck when the German occupied again in 1941. And that's when hell broke loose. They started a certain day that everybody, all the Jews has to come to the marketplace. And I told my parents that I'm not going. And they asked me, why don't you want to go? So I say, they can catch me. I'm faster than anybody. As a kid, I could really run, and very few people could catch me. So after a while, they stopped arguing with me, and I remained in the house. At that time, my father's mother came to live with us, and she was in the 90s already, that she lived in another town, that was occupied in the German, so somebody brought her to us, and she lived with us. So instead of going to the marketplace, I remained in the house. So did my grandmother, and I watched through the windows. The SS used to go from door to door to see if any people that did not go to the marketplace. So when an officer walked in to our house, we lived in two rooms. One was occupied by my father for his workshop, and one room we lived in. When the officer walked in to the workshop, he kept on touching a lot of tools, looked at the tools, this and that, and I kept on walking with him and talking to him. And he looked at me and never said a word to me, but any tools he touched, I told him, hey, this is good, you know. He could understand. Yiddish sounded some words almost like German. And most of the time when I looked through the window before he walked in, he pulled out a lot of people, or whoever were there. When he walked up to the door, he turned around, looked at me, and lifted up his hand and made it a move like that, and didn't bother me. So I remained in the house, and my parents at the time and my brother, they never came back. They took about 1,500 people from the marketplace, and they had to walk about 10 to 15 kilometers, and they killed about 1,500 people. So I was left on my own.
That's 1941?
This was 1941. And then a week or few weeks later, they made up the ghetto for the people that were left in the same town, a few blocks surrounding with wires. And possibility is that we lived in that ghetto probably up to a year or more. Dates I don't remember. Since I was young, I never paid attention to the dates. So at the end of 42, at the end of 42, they closed up the ghetto and moved everybody about 2 kilometers out of town. There were army barracks, and they gathered Jews from surrounding towns and made up a transport with cattle trains. So in January the 15th, it was in the middle of, it was at night, so farmers with wagons took us to the train about 30, or, no, could be about, I think it's about 20 kilometers where the train was. From there, we boarded the cattle trains to Auschwitz. The chances are that we started middle of the night, and it took about a whole day at night that we arrived in Auschwitz. I don't know exact mileage. It could have been 200 kilometers from our hometown Zambrów to Krakow, which is about close to Auschwitz. the biggest town. So we arrived in Auschwitz. Could have been January the 15th or the 16th. It was very cold, probably below zero.
Were you dressed warm?
I doubt it. Whatever we had on, we were not allowed to take hardly anything with us. So in the cattle train we packed that you probably hardly had any room to sit down. And we arrived in Auschwitz. It was at night. The time I don't remember. I know it was dark. And they opened up the doors, and SS, some of them with dogs, German shepherds, a loud noise, rouse, rouse, you mean to get out of the cattle train. And then they started the selection, left, right, some young people. They used to do it in ghettos, in the ghetto, when they needed people for work, as I remembered. So they chose the able bodies for work. And I was chosen already since I was young and small and skinny. And at that time, I had 2 sisters with me, and each one had a child. Each one had a son. And I remember already being on the truck, and I didn't know where, what, and when. Then I realized I used common sense, and I figured I don't belong here. So I got from the truck. It was at night, and under the wheels, and an SS officer was walking back and forth to keep, nobody should run away or whatever, for him to keep warm, so he walked back and forth. So when he turned around behind his back, I ran into the younger able bodies, and they backed up, made room for me. And then after they were finished the selection, we walked, I don't know how far. It was middle of the night, and we arrived during the night in Birkenau, that's where the 2 crematoriums were. It's probably between a mile or 2 from the main campus, Auschwitz. So the first thing when we arrived there, they made tattoos on our hands, which I have one right here. The number is 88,647. So, and the guy that did the tattoos, he asked me, how did I get here? So I told him, with the rest of the people. He says, I don't mean that. He said to me, we don't have children in this camp. So I told him how I got here. I said I was already selected with all the people with the children in the truck, and I got under the wheels when the SS officer walking back and forth. So I ran into able bodies for work. I figured the same like they used to do it in the ghettos. I don't know, the distance could be 50 feet, 100 feet. It wasn't that far. And that's why he asked me, when I told him, he says, I don't believe you were able to do it. I say, you asked me, and if they don't have any children, I say, that's what happened. Until today, a lot of people don't believe me because nobody did it. Or if somebody did it, didn't talk about it.
Yeah. So evidently you did it when the officer wasn't watching.
No, he turned around to walk back and forth to stay warm.
But
So he
in that
walked back and
short
forth.
distance, you scooted fast.
That's it. It was the middle of the night anyway. It wasn't that much light anyway.
Yeah.
And besides, he was cold, so he didn't pay attention. He didn't look backwards. He looked forwards.
And you took
He didn't
advantage
see
of
me.
that. That's
I took
wonderful.
advantage of it, and that's this. I survived. Like I survived the first time when my parents told me to go
Yes.
to the marketplace. This is the second time. I don't know if it's survival skill or common sense. It worked.
You were smart.
If I would have gotten caught, of course, I would have been killed.
Yeah.
So when we...
Were your sisters with you at that time?
No, all the sisters that were on the truck, they guessed everybody.
Oh.
So, and my one or two sisters, the oldest and the youngest, they worked in different towns. So I really don't know what happened to them, because everybody had trouble surviving on their own. And since so many years went by, so I figure none of them survived. Otherwise, we had relatives in America, so probably they would have gotten in touch if they would have survived. So, anyway, as soon as we arrived in Birkenau, we had to get showers, and they gave us the striped uniforms, and then they gave us the bunks, 3 bunks, one on top. It's like drawers that you just about could sit up. It was very bad. At that time it was middle of the night, and I figured this is a bad place. So I walked out, and I seen a broom standing in the barrack that I was in, and I started sweeping. And one of the guy in charge of the barrack, he asked me what I'm doing. I say, I can't sleep, I'm nervous, so I figure I might as well clean up a little bit. This helped me a lot. So he showed it, he woke up to the guys that work, about 4 or 5 guys cleaning the whole barrack. And he gave them hell. He says, take a look, he just got here and he seen dirt, he was cleaning. And one was a younger guy, small, and they gave me a pair of slacks and a jacket that's hanging down on me. So he said to the small guy, he says, do you have anything different to fit him? He says, yeah, I have some extra clothes. And he says, you have room on the bunk for him? He said, yes. So he was by himself on top of bunk, which is so, and I remained the rest of the winter working in the barrack. So it's another skill that helped. I survived that winter, and it was rough. So then I got other jobs, working. But I wound up on one job working with dynamite to rip apart, level some of the houses so people couldn't hide, would be more visible, Mm-hmm. So we were 30 people. And I was lucky at least over there you're able to get a little bit better soup once a day while working there. Not only that, but on that job, very few people got beat up or killed. Maybe during the 6 months or so that I worked, or 8 months, I don't remember the time. Maybe 1 or 2 got killed, I don't remember exactly. And for what? Maybe. But actually, they provoked, they called you. The guy standing high up, they says, watching us, they wanted to kill somebody, so they called you. And then you come close to them, so they killed you. So you probably learned when they called you, you just didn't pay attention. So you kept on walking. So maybe survival skill when you see where you can get in trouble. But on this job that I was in, one time I didn't feel good, and I was on the lower part in the basement, hanging around because I didn't feel good. It was warmer in the basement. And the SS officer in charge of the job looked around because once in a while he wanted to do some work, and I spoke German a little bit. He didn't see me. He looked around and found me in the basement, and he asked me what's wrong. So I told him I don't feel so good. I must have some fever. And he said to me, showed me the SS insignia, and he told me he's not one of them. And he said to keep your mouth shut. He said, don't talk to anybody, because if they find out, they'll kill both of us. He says, don't say anything to anybody.
Hold on. Okay, ready to roll. Go ahead.
So he used to come to work on a bicycle. So he says, I'll bring you something. And he handed me two white pills, I remember, and he says, chew it up. And he didn't say anything anymore. I didn't want to even ask him his name or where he's from, because he was scared to death, because the Gestapo was always checking on everything. So after a few weeks later, I told him that you're not going to see me anymore the way things are happening. So he told me what's going on. So I told him, I say, from the people that work, they constantly pick him. The people that are a little bit weak, they can replace him with able body, because more transports are coming in. So they get rid of the people that weak and unable to work. So he asked me who is doing the picking. So I told him. He says, He started cursing. He says, "Don't worry about it." He says, "I'm playing cards with him tonight. I'll talk to him." The next day, he came back and he told me that he wants to know who I am. So we used to use the detonator to make electricity. So we used to pick it up at the gate in the morning when we walked out to work after they counted the people. And then in the evening, used to bring it back and leave it outside the gate. We weren't allowed to take it in the barracks. So I used to do it picking up and turn it in, but I don't think I couldn't carry it because it was very heavy. It's a metal box. Square box, could be about 10 inches wide, about maybe 14 inches high, and it's a lot of, or maybe it was bigger. I was lucky to carry it a little bit near the gate. So once or twice when he picked, he looked around for me. When I told him, he asked me what barrack I was in. I think it was barrack 16. So he looked around for me and sent me into the barracks. So I wasn't the one that he picked from. So after a while, I don't know why I stopped working on there. It could be that at that time it was about in the middle of 1944. I don't know exactly. It was still summertime, and they started transports out. I don't know where the transport were going. I don't remember if we could choose, or they used to announce a transport of 200, 300, or 400 people are going out.
Where were they going? No, don't know.
Nobody knew exactly. Nothing, anything, going or coming, whatever.
Was there any sense that you were aware that the Germans were losing the war? Did you get any sense of that in 44?
We had an idea because we heard the planes going and a lot of noise, and the Germans at that time didn't have that kind of heavy stuff like the Americans had, the bombers. So we knew, the noise making, so we knew. And they started, at that time, I didn't know, but they started to liquidate Auschwitz. So on one of the transport, we decided to go on that transport. And from Auschwitz, they sent us also in cattle trains. I don't know how many hundreds we were, because nobody told us, and we didn't do the counting. We just went like sheep.
And you didn't know where you were going?
We had no idea where we were going. We arrived at Oranienburg. It was about, I think, 30 kilometers from Berlin. It was near a base, because we were hanging around the hangars, but we didn't hear any airplanes landing there. We were supposed to work in a factory there, I guess, otherwise why would they bring us there? But since they bombed the hell out of them there, so sometimes they counted us in the morning, this and that, and we went back in the barracks. They must have bombed the factory. So after a few weeks or a month, I don't know exactly the time, they took us on a transport. We walked to a railroad station, I don't know how far away, maybe a mile, 2 or 3. And Oranienburg was close to Sachsenhausen. During the walk, we seen the sign Sachsenhausen. Must have been the name of the city. And later on I found out it was also a name of concentration camp, Sachsenhausen. So on that transport, we wound up in Bavaria, in Dachau.
This was still 1944?
It was 1944. It was the end of the summer, I guess, or close to it. And we arrived there in a small camp near the woods. There was a lot of woods there, and the name was Kaufering, near a small town, I guess. And from there, we went to work deep in the woods, and they were building like a half moon, and the train was going through it. It was very big, a giant place. Since they bombed the factories, so they probably tried to camouflage to build factories deep in the woods. But we didn't see nothing in the inside. They were still finishing it off. But must have been very big since the train went through it. So this was the end of, we were in the camp the fall of 44 to the spring, late spring of 44. And then one day we knew that the war was going bad for the Germans. We didn't know much, but we had an idea.
Did some of the killings kind of slow down? Or?
In that camp, we were lucky. In that camp, we were lucky because there were 2 inmates, brothers, that went to school with the leader of the camp. The assessment was a from the Czechoslovakia, and the rumors was they knew him from that city they were from. And we were lucky, there were hardly any killings in that camp. And the food was much better than from Auschwitz or Birkenau. And we started marching. The chances are where we marched, we didn't know. But in my opinion is they got orders to close the camp. And this guy, the officer in charge, we were marching, and one time as we were marching, a plane came down, and
a German plane?
No, it was an American plane, the German hardly had any planes left because they bombed the hell out of them. So all of a sudden, he cruised around the plane. He probably radioed for more help. And then they shut up everything around us, gave us time enough to run away because we were waving. So they knew we were not military. So, but we were afraid to run into the woods because probably soldiers were there. We didn't know what to do. So we was laying there watching and waving to them, on the grass.
So was this winter?
No, it was summertime.
Summertime.
Okay. This was the end of April.
Were you dressed in your prison uniform?
Yeah,
with the
striped uniform. Yeah. This was, and during the night, we just lay down any place on the grass, and that's how we laid. Next morning, and we were quite a few guards that were watching us. Maybe to start out, maybe it was 8 or 10, and every day during the night, some of the guards must have ran away because each time we seen less and less guards. One morning, we didn't see any SS uniforms anymore. Nobody's guarding us. So we were liberated, but it's still in Germany. So all of a sudden we seen a small place, used to be a place for civilian workers, I guess, or whatever. So it was a big room there and everything else, so we did hang around there for a day or two. I don't know how long, but then me and 2 other guys, we decided not to hang around the big crowds, so we went into the woods, the 3 of us. We were afraid if something happens, we'll all get killed. At least you have a better chance. So while we were hiding out in the woods, we seen a German officer walking with 2 or 3 aides with a white flag, and he came across us, so we figured they're going to kill us. Instead, he's asking us where the Americans are. So we told him, every once we hear some shots, but we really don't know where they are. So he said to try to hold down for a few hours because he's going to surrender his army. It just so happened about 2 or 3 hours we hear a lot of noise from the main highway. So we were high up in the woods. We walk up to the main highway. We seen the Germans with their, in the trucks, whatever, tanks, walking one way, and the Americans with green uniforms walking the other way, driving the other way. So we managed to look a place where we can go out to the highway. So we walked over a bridge where the American side is, and we felt like we were liberated by then. And we were lucky the Americans, when they stopped, for whatever reason, whatever, they gave us a few crumbs, some chocolate, some this. They seen the uniforms, so they helped us. And we were liberated, I think, but I remember it could have been May the 5th of 1945. So since then,
Were you placed in a displaced, what do they call it, displaced persons camp?
No, we were hanging around in that private place a little bit, you know. And then a few guys of us, it wasn't far. The big city near it was Wolfratshausen, I think. And then, I don't know what happened, we wound up, we stuck together in Munich. It was all in Bavaria. We were liberated, I think. And I really don't know what I was doing, but I kept on asking if anybody, when I met survivors from my hometown, I didn't ask for relatives because I knew then that I didn't have any, or I don't know.
Yeah.
So one guy told me, he says he remembers somebody from my hometown, and the town was Poking, small town. It was near Passau. Passau was the bigger town. I don't know how far from Munich it was. It couldn't be too far, maybe 50 to 100 kilometers. And I took the train to that town to meet the guy from my hometown, which I did find him. Eventually, 2, 3, or 6 months later, he had a brother and a sister in Israel, and he was able to go to Israel. And I remember that my mother had some brothers in America, so I kept on asking and they lived, I remember talking about Philadelphia. And I remember their name, first names and last name, of course, since it's different. Last name was Borstein. And I remember the first names.
We had a good memory.
So I found anybody from Philadelphia, and I asked him for a favor to try to find some of my relatives. It just so happened they wrote a letter to their family, and one of my uncles read the Jewish paper and found that I'm looking for them. So it was happened to be my uncle, and finally I got the word from my uncle that he has a son in the army in Germany. He's in the American army. It happened to be the same age as I was, about 18. He must 18 or whatever, 18 or 19. I even forgot what year it was. Hadn't be it could have been by that time 1946.
Okay.
So I was about 17 and a half when I was liberated. Could have been 18 or 19 when I was. And eventually I started correspondence with my family. And then I kept on registered any place I could to go to America. Eventually I came through an organization, I think UNRWA, that I was able to get papers to come to America. And this was 1949, on August the 27th, I arrived in America.
Where did you leave from?
I left from Bremerhaven in Germany on a military transport ship. It was terrific. The food was
but you
the same type of food for the American soldiers ate.
Oh,
You know,
it probably tasted good.
oh, the first time we had American food.
Yeah. But you came to America by plane.
No, by the transport ship, by boat.
Oh, by boat, transport boat. I thought.
The name of the ship was General B. Hershey,
Oh,
and we arrived in Boston.
okay.
From Boston, I took the train.
Was your family aware? Your uncle was aware that you were coming?
I doubt it. I didn't know in those days to tell him. I didn't even know what I was doing.
Well, you knew a lot. You knew a lot.
Yeah, but
You knew where you wanted to go.
I don't remember ever calling them or writing letters. After the war, I had my total education was 3 years of grammar school. So the end of the war, when the war was over, I could hardly read and write. Whatever I knew, I forgot after 5 or 6 years. Don't use pencil or paper or writing, you know, as a kid. So I didn't correspond very much. So when I arrived in Boston, I took the train to Philadelphia, and the train stopped in 2 different places. So the first stop where it was, I looked out, I didn't see anybody. Actually, they must have known because they came to pick me up, so I remember now.
Oh, okay.
I remember now, I let them know that I'm on the transport and I'm coming. Oh, I think I called them when I arrived in Boston that I'm coming from this and this train. I think I called them from Boston. I remember something now. So they were at the station to pick me up, but I didn't see anybody because it was downstairs. People were not allowed. It's only the people that board the train.
Yeah.
So I figure I'm not going out here, so I'll go further. So the last stop in Philadelphia, I came out and I started asking people for this and this place. Oh, you should have gone out in the first place. So I didn't know what to do. So I called my uncle. My uncle was in the other train station waiting for me. So my aunt answered, and she told me to take a cab from there to her house. And she called the station for them to come home, that I went in the wrong place. So I arrived. At that time, I don't think I had $1 in my pocket or a penny.
Were you carrying clothes? Did you have a bag?
I don't think I even have clothes. Maybe I had a few pieces, or maybe not. Could be I don't remember anything.
That's fine.
I mean, it's so many years back.
No surprise.
Yeah, if I had this very little.
So you stayed with your aunt and uncle?
Yes, and just so happened that this uncle of mine was the youngest of my brothers and of his brothers and sisters. He lived with my grandfather next door. In fact, I was born in his house because in the house that we lived was very small and was very crowded. We all lived in one room. So I was born in my grandfather's house and my uncle's house. But the same uncle that I came and lived with got a passport to visit his brothers in 1937, I think. And instead of going back, the brother sent them to Cuba. So this way from Cuba, after a few months, they able to bring him back to America. That's what I can recall.
Yeah.
So at that time when I arrived, 1930, no, I arrived in America in 1949, August the 27th. I remember now.
Yeah.
At that time I was about 22 years old. And staying with my uncle. They had no children. It was a bad neighborhood. And my uncle at that time owned a small meats and grocery store, like a one-man operation, very small. So I did hang around for a few weeks there. And then he got me a job. He did get me a job in the meat store. I used to work about 7 days a week, many hours, for $25 a week. They didn't let me do much. I didn't know too much about meat cutting or anything. And so I swept up, carried stuff, this and that. So one time I asked the butcher on the back, I said, "You need some help?" He said, "Sure, grab a knife." He was cutting up beef stew. So I did grab a knife. On the side I watched him what he was doing. I was good with my hands. So I watched him what he was doing, and I was cutting the same size pieces, small pieces of meat. All of a sudden, the owner came up, and he stood and watched me. He says, "I didn't know you were a meat cutter." So I told him, "It's nothing to it. You don't have to be a meat cutter to cut meat." He says, "What do you mean you don't have to?" I says, "How do you know?" I said, "I'm watching how he's doing." He says, "You're pretty good at it." I said, "I'm good with my hands all my life, you know. I helped my father in the shop, you know,
Yeah.
all kind of tools and everything else." So at that time, once in a while, they let me do things. So I stood there, and all of a sudden, they used to go a ferry across the river, Delaware River, to New Jersey. From that, all of a sudden, they did away with the ferry, the old-fashioned. They built a bridge, the Benjamin Franklin Bridge, to go to Jersey. They opened up the bridge. So nobody went to pass by the ferry to buy meat from the butcher shop. They had to go out of business. So I did hang around my uncle's store, and some guy was selling cigarettes, candy, you know, a jobber. And I told him to look for me for a place. All of a sudden he told me, he says, "This and this place, if I had somebody," he says, "go ahead, see, maybe you'll get a job there." So I went to them and talked to him. It was a nice sized shop, about 3 people working there on a avenue. And at that time, after leaving the first job for $25, I had another job for $40, and I had to go on the other job. I had an appendix operation. So I went back there after the operation. I never called him. I didn't know you have to let him know. You can. I said I was sick and I was in the hospital, so I didn't call him. I came back. So this guy lost a lot of business. He didn't need me. So anyway, I went to the other guy. He hired me He says, "You a butcher?" I said, "Sure, I know the work." At that time, he started me at $60.
Wow.
Because I'm a butcher. I still didn't know much. But I stood in this guy in place probably about 2 years. From $60, in the 2 years I worked myself up to $100.
Wow.
He gave me the keys to open up when he went to the market, and he gave me...
He trusted you. Yeah.
Yes, he gave me a delivery truck to go home with. I was a big shot already at that time.
He said, "We got 1 minute left."
Anyway, what happened, I got married in 1952. The first child was born in 1953. I went in business in 1954. A one-man operation. For a few $100s I bought a business. I didn't do much business, but my percentage of profit was good because I eliminated middlemen. And so I didn't do much business, maybe $600-700 total, whole week, 7 days a week. But my percentage of profit was good because I eliminated the middleman.
Yeah.
So I started making a decent living, but I worked like a slave. I was used to slavery, so it didn't bother me, and I always did hard work. In 54 I went in business. In 56 I bought a 6-year-old house, 3-story house for $12,500.
Yes.
At this time I put about $5,500 down on a house. Since I worked 7 days a week, I saved every penny I could to put a big down payment on a house. So I took a 15-year mortgage and paid off the house in 10 years. In 1956, I have mortgage free.
Wow.
No mortgage payments. I was lucky that at that time we had 4 kids.
How many children do you have?
We raised 4 kids, 2 boys, 2 girls.